Good afternoon, you wee bastards, and welcome back to another War Thunder video with Koala. And today, I want to continue a series I started some months ago, with 5 more things I'd love to see added to War Thunder. Now, if you haven't seen the first video, it will be linked below and on screen, but basically what we're doing is taking a bit of a break from looking at what quote-unquote needs to happen, like battle rating decompression, improved servers, grinding issues, etc. You know, the big things that we talk about all the time. Instead, we're looking at a bunch of little potential features that could come into the game, and are at least fun to talk about, so if you've ever wondered what are some random things that I would like to see, this is it. Now, the following suggestions aren't to be taken too seriously. The purpose of this video isn't to suggest that any of these should be a priority for Gaijin to add into War Thunder. We're just throwing ideas out there, for fun. Having said that, last time I made one of these videos, one of the things I suggested was added into the game soon after, and another we know is in the works, that being jet-era aircraft carriers. Yes, that was us. Apparently, we can get through to Gaijin with good ideas, so today I've put together a list of 5 more, and this last one, oh am I proud of this one. By the way, I am live right now on Twitch TV as you see this. I stream every Wednesday, Friday and Saturday, so as always, come jump into the stream at the link below, and we can chat more there. Number 5 on today's list is the idea of mercy mechanics. This is something suggested in the comment of the last episode, and it basically eradicates the problem of F9F pilots being functionally incapable of taking off. The idea behind this is that should you crash into a teammate on takeoff, or otherwise die early on, you wouldn't simply be out of the match, but be able to respawn and start over. This would be fantastic for air battles, as currently you've got upwards of 10 to 12 aircraft all trying to take off the same runway at once, which often means collisions. That's to say nothing of ping or packet loss slamming you down, or terrible air spawns which put you 10 feet behind a slower allied plane you can't help but crash into, plus the occasional team killing scumbag. This can get really irritating really quickly, whether you're the player who just screwed up your takeoff, the guy who got rammed by an ally who didn't look before he pulled up, the jet who airspawned right behind a slower teammate, or a surviving player watching a third of your team go down before they've even gotten off the runway. With this mechanic, you would essentially be granted, say, 60 seconds of safe time at the beginning of the match, where should you die, you'd be taken back to the spawn menu as if you'd never spawned in the first place. No repair cost, no crew lock, and no idiots letting you down, taking a third of your team away. This could be extended to tank battles, but you're not likely to be dying early on in tanks unless it's an enemy who kills you spawn to spawn, or with a lucky artillery shot. Even then, if it happens in the first, say, 30 seconds, I guess an argument could be made for letting you spawn back in and try again, without losing those spawn points or that vehicle. In this circumstance though, you'd need to make sure that the enemy still gets the credit for the kill, and someone who team kills on takeoff should also still get that Silver Lion penalty, even though the shot down player doesn't get the repair cost. Sure, it might be easier to just give 60 seconds of invulnerability instead, but all in all, a great suggestion, so thank you to the lad who commented that on the last video. For number 4, I want to talk about multi-crew vehicles. This could probably be a video all to itself, but I really think multi-crew could work in game. The idea behind this, if you're not sure, is that 2 or more players would be controlling the same vehicle, allowing, say, one player to drive a tank while the other controls the turret, or a bomber pilot to allow a second real player to man turrets while they concentrate on flying and bombing. The main problems I see with this is that either it means fewer actual vehicles on a team of the same number of players, because 2 or 3 are all inside the one vehicle, or you have to allow a greater number of players onto one or both teams, which can end up having mechanical issues for the game itself. Packet loss, for example, if the servers can't hack it. Nonetheless, I think it can work, and while I'm not sure I really see the point of it in tanks, sure, it means one person can focus on driving while the gunner can still shoot at somebody behind you, that's a very situational ability. It would be fantastic for bombers in air battles, and I think it would make one plane in particular very nice to fly indeed, the P-61 Black Widow. This aircraft was designed around the idea of a turret fighter, basically a mini gunship, which using its turret could dogfight and shoot down enemies even if they weren't directly in front of it. In real life, the pilot had the ability to lock the turret to face forward and combine its 4 machine guns with the 4 belly-mounted 20mm cannons as a fixed forward armament. That's a comparable armament to the F7F Tiger Cat, and something I think the Black Widow should have modelled in game. But in order to use the turreted 50 cals currently, you can't actually fly, at least not very well. With a second real player in the aircraft, however, the pilot could choose to unhook the turret, hand off control to a dedicated gunner, and continue to fly around, manoeuvre effectively, and engage targets with the 20mm. Meanwhile, the gunner can aim the 50 cals at another target or protect the rear if you overshoot. Of course, as a heavy fighter, the best way for enemies to kill you is to force an overshoot and get you as you fly past. Not so with the P61 if this were modelled. If both the pilot slaving the turret as an additional forward armament and multi-crew capability were added in, the P61 could probably go up a BR. And if you saw my US fighter rework video, one thing I groaned about was how the tech tree makes you research from a 4.7 fighter to a 4.0 one. That makes no sense. An excuse to raise the P61 fixes that. Multi-crew capability also adds an abundance of potential, say for helicopters in simulator mode to have a dedicated pilot and gunner, or for capital ships to have 2 players manning primary and secondary gun batteries. Players would only be rewarded for the actions they and their position are completing, so the pilot of a multi-crewed bomber would receive rewards for bombing, while the gunner would get the credit for aircraft kills. And while these two would show up as 2 separate players on the stat board, one of them could be highlighted a different colour or have a specific icon next to their name to show that they're not in their own vehicle, they're sharing another's. Now, number 3 is something I've seen suggested many times in the past, but never with any real definitiveness behind it. We're talking about Airfield AA because it really needs changing. One of the biggest problems with high-tier air realistic battles is how quickly matches end. Players are incredibly aggressive and they end up losing their aircraft for just 1 or 2 kills as quickly as possible, rather than playing it a wee bit safer and ending up having to go back to land, refuel and rearm. This, in my opinion, is the main reason why some players believe that there's no skill in top tier jets, which I say is completely false, but that's a video all of its own. The problem is, why wouldn't you play overly aggressively when to go back to your base and land is practically a death sentence? Aircraft capable of over Mach 1 on the deck can take off the moment you land and make their first pass over your airbase before you've even spooled up the engine again. You've got a couple of 40mm protecting you whilst you're incredibly vulnerable, and if you're lucky they might even open up before you're dead and the attacker is disengaging. They'll do precisely flack all to defend you. At lower tiers, the exact opposite problem exists. Players sit on their airfields completely safe rather than attempt to take off and fight if the odds are against them. At these tiers, even approaching within a few kilometers of the airfield is an automatic death sentence. Giving cowards every ability to win, that shouldn't happen. Even if they're earning nothing, some men just want to watch the world suffer repair costs. So I have a 2-part solution, and many of you will have heard it before. In fact, I think it was Spitfire who first proposed it about 3 years ago. Firstly, we need some era-appropriate AA, meaning we replaced a 40mm gun placement with more rapid-firing guns, say on the back of M42 Dusters or ZSU 57s at tier 5, VADs and Shilkas at tier 6, and then short-range SAM sights at the eventual tier 7 I'm banking on coming with the update at the end of this year. The way these would work is that they would create an entirely impenetrable bubble of protection, the diameter of which would expand with the tier. Flying inside that bubble, you'd have seconds before you're guaranteed dead. Let's get rid of this RNG element where sometimes it's just an insta-kill, and sometimes you fly around for 3 minutes before even getting a yellow wing. This guaranteed 100% protection, however, would only last for a limited time before it just turns off, and would not fire at all while there are friendlies in the air around it. This means that when a friendly aircraft enters that bubble on a landing approach, the AA completely switches off, and until they are down on the runway, there is no Airfield AA. From the moment they touch down, they have 2 minutes to repair, refuel and rearm, and get back up again before the AA will simply switch off, and not switch back on again until another friendly aircraft lands and starts their own 2-minute timer. If that's still too easily abusable for aircraft to simply wait for the target to take off and from the moment they leave the tarmac have zero protection, then we could split the AAA up into 4 quadrants, and whichever one the friendly is in doesn't fire, but the other 3 do, at least until that 2-minute timer runs out. This is not only realistic, these things have to reload, remember, and they would not be firing if there's a danger of hitting friendlies, but it completely fixes both problems of people hawking over airfields pouncing on easy kills at top tier, and cowards sitting on the runways at lower tiers completely untouchable. I'll lump into this section the idea that we have larger, more expansive airports with multiple intersecting runways, longer runways. That would help to fix the crashing on takeoff problem I mentioned as well. But an AA rework like this is something I'd love to see. Number 2, and this is another suggestion from the last video's comments. This has been a very Air RB focused video so far, so here's one for you groundhogs. Terrain deformation. Not only does this mean more building destruction creating piles of rubble around the map, but bombs, artillery and even large caliber HE shells would create craters and actually affect the 3D terrain itself. Certain areas would become more difficult to pass the more heavily they were assaulted, with small craters turning into large ditches, or collapsed buildings actually staying around rather than sinking through the floor, blocking previously accessible pathways. All this would dynamically change the layout of the map itself as time progresses, allowing new routes and firing positions to open up or shut down, and tanks to go hull down in the craters left by artillery strikes or bombs, or amongst the rubble of destroyed buildings. War Thunder's physics-based building destruction has always been one of the most impressive things about the game, but it's not present on all maps, not even all the buildings on the maps where it is, and it's very inconsistent with what causes destruction and what doesn't. For example, these buildings are going down like putty to this 165mm, and even smaller guns like 105mm howitzers can remove whole swathes of unstable buildings. Rockets 127 or 130mm in size, however, nothing. Even bombs as big as 2,000 pounds don't cause any more damage than a 105mm HE shell, sometimes less, and against certain buildings, they don't do a thing. But even if all buildings on all maps were theoretically destructible with enough force, the less stable the building, the less force required, bombs dropped on the ground create just this awful looking 2D graphic, with no actual impact on the terrain around them. Not to mention that this decal is simply sized up with the size of the bomb, meaning that with an 1800kg or the PE8's mighty 5-ton bomb, they are extremely low resolution and look really stupid. Once buildings are knocked down and only rubble left, that rubble is static as well. What we could do is give the ability for all buildings to be theoretically destructible if shells or bombs with enough energy hit them, and also a 3D damage model for the terrain itself, with larger bombs making larger depth and diameter craters in the ground, or blasting away the existing piles of rubble in a real physics-based way. Of course, some artificial hard limits would have to be imposed, so that a squadron of F4 Phantoms, for example, couldn't just open up yawning chasms around enemy spawns, or to cheaply defend cap circles by making them inaccessible. But a certain amount of terrain deformation would go a long way, not just for immersion, but to spice up gameplay itself. Now, for number 1, and just like last time with the Forrestal class supercarriers, this idea was actually the main influence behind my making this video in the first place: ordnance selection. Recently, Gaijin went and revamped the way secondary weapons for aircraft works, with this alternate menu rather than a drop down full of presets. The problem is, these are still just those same presets, and while this system looks far better and is much easier to use, it wasn't quite what I personally had in mind for what Gaijin should do with aircraft ordnance, so I'm going to share that with you today. Firstly, I like this menu and I think it should be kept, but by default, it could show you a more restricted selection of only certain preset ordnance loadouts the plane can carry, requiring player customization to really unlock the aircraft's full potential. Full warning, this mostly applies to our top tier multi-role fighters like the F4 Phantom. In the hangar, this drop up menu could have an additional option, Create Loadout, in which you'd be taken to a similar view as the customization screen for skins and decals. Here, each hardpoint on the aircraft would have a little widget, and clicking on it would drop down a menu of what ordnance can be carried on that specific hardpoint. Let's take the F4E for example. Selecting this hardpoint and choosing 1000-pound bombs would of course mirror the same on the opposite wing, but then I could click on this hardpoint and select Zuni rocket pods. On these racks I can carry AIM-9 sidewinders, and I can choose if I want to put additional bombs, perhaps a single 2000-pounder, on the centre line hardpoint. Or I could just select the AIM-9s on these pylons and 3 1000-pound bombs on the belly rack. That way I'm not held back by needing to carry 7,000 pounds of bombs, just 3,000, but I can still go and destroy one whole base per flyout in RRB. Boom, we just created 2 new ordnance loadouts, and players could save those custom loadouts to the presets menu in much the same way that you save lineups as presets. This cleans up that menu drastically, and means that Gaijin doesn't have to create a separate preset for literally every possible combination of weapons that aircraft can carry. When you then enter into a match, you select from either the default presets, the more limited ones, if you haven't made your own yet, or it would show you the saved presets you created and allow you to click to select any one of them. This is actually my favourite idea I've ever had for this game. I might make a whole video solely about this because I'm really excited just to talk about this idea. We're not done yet. Eventually, I think we all know we're going to end up with radar-guided air-to-air missiles like the AIM-7 Sparrow in-game, meaning that the same aircraft could have multiple types of air-to-air missiles at once. We currently have this with the Mirage, which carries a single R530 on its centre line rail. This missile is fantastic when you sleeve it to the Mirage's exceptionally powerful radar, and has no trouble hitting targets almost frontally from 6 or more kilometers away. I've killed Phantoms at 9 even. It's practically useless in a dogfight however, but the Mirage also of course carries the R550 magic missiles for dogfight situations. The only problem is, you can't select which missile you want to use at any given time. You have to use the R530 first, meaning if you get into a scuffle early on, your first missile is almost useless, while later on you might really wish you had a long-range missile that could do this.
Oh, that's long range against this F4E, but I think we might be able to get him. It's still pulling, it's still pulling. Oh my god!
Oh, you got him.
What happens when the F4 Phantom gets AIM-7s alongside its AIM-9s? Are you going to have to launch all 4 of one type of missile before you get to start using the other? That's going to suck. That means we need separate keybinds for these different missile types, but adding more controls is not a good thing for the poor console players. They've already got to control gear, flaps, throttle, air brake, guns. You have to spool up the missile and then launch it, turn on radar, lock targets with the radar, drop bombs or fire rockets. They need to use flares. That's already too much, and while the multifunction menu is great for when you're flying towards the battle preparing for an engagement, it's too clunky to use it mid-combat. This is where the second part of this suggestion comes in. I told you I was excited to talk about this. As we can select different ordnance options per hardpoint in the hangar, we could also select which hardpoint we want active, choose which weapon type is selected in-game, using either the multifunction menu or modifier keys. Say you hold Alt and then hit a key on the numpad, it'll select that number hardpoint. This means that we can actually use the same keybind to drop bombs, fire rockets, and use different types of air-to-air missiles on the same aircraft, because that key, the key you use to launch the missile or rocket or drop the bomb, only has to do one of those jobs at a time. You could, in the Phantom say, select your AIM-9s. Once used, I think it should automatically switch to the mirrored hardpoint until you select otherwise. But then you switch to your AIM-7s to engage a high altitude, long range target with the same keybind, and then switch to either rockets or bombs, even different sizes of bombs, and use each weapon as you want to using the same keybind. Oh, I love this idea. That keybind could also be used to drop something else, because I can't leave this video now without talking about external fuel tanks. Players currently are saying that we need bigger maps for top tier, and if radar guided missiles were to be introduced, they'd need to get even bigger still, something I definitely agree with. The problem is, you remember what it's like fighting in an ME163 on the English Channel map? You barely have enough fuel to get to the fight before you're bingo and need to RTB, and it's not fun. A lot of our top tier jets would feel like this on the larger maps we'll need to support their style of play, without the option for external fuel tanks added into that hardpoint customization menu as ordnance. Many players have asked for drop tanks in game, they look awesome, and could allow aircraft like the MiG-21 to still get their manoeuvrability bonus from having a lower fuel load on board, while being able to cross large maps on the fuel in their external tanks, before dropping them using that same keybind once they have that hardpoint selected. Anyway lads, that is going to be it for this video. This has been 5 more things I'd love to see added to War Thunder. Please let me know your thoughts on all the things I've talked about here, especially that last one, and let me know which, if any, you'd like to see the most. Leave your own suggestions down below. I am hopefully going to make this a more regular series. Totally haven't said that before. But until then, remember to leave a like and subscribe, join the coalition, join our live stream, keep a whiskey in hand, keep your kill tone, and I'll catch you next time. I see a wee thank you to these lads for supporting the channel on Patreon. Worldlike Complex, Tracer, Henri Gusan, Ian Anderson, Blue Fleet, Mo, Roskill, Bias Remover, Metallic Green, Chucked152, Crescent, Captain Fubar, The Britlander, Seagull Nuts, DA261, Latvian Wolf, Gisli Gadarsson and Darker Recon, you lads are pro. If you want to join them, then check out Patreon at the link in the description below to get early access to videos and much more.